Hi, I'm John Everett with Zurn Industries. We've had a considerable number of customers call us and ask us to make a video on the 1.25" through 2" 375XL. They were really concerned with how to change the rubber components, basically how the valve comes apart. Well, after a number of inquiries and really getting prodded along, I think that's what we're going to do today. We're going to show you how to do a rubber repair kit in an 1.25" through 2" 375XL. Now, for most of you, your performance testers or even homeowners, you want to follow the typical things that you would do when you're going to repair a backflow. Number one, first and foremost, you've got to let somebody know inside the building that you're going to shut the water off. We don't ever want to shut the water off without letting somebody know. We could cause some very severe damage and harm if we do shut that water off. So again, we're going to tell the proper authorities that we're going to shut the water off and we're going to repair the backflow preventer. Now, here I've got an 1.25" 375XL, and quite frankly, 1.25" through 2, they're all the same body family, it's just different end size, end connections. So they're all going to be exactly the same with respect to repair. And naturally, I'd have this mounted in the pipes on risers. It would be a lot easier to do if it was actually installed in the field. But, we've got to do it here in a bench in a controlled environment. So, kind of follow along with me. I will have to put the valve out of position a few times to take it apart, but I think you'll understand and you'll follow me. So again, first thing we want to do, we want to go ahead and shut off the water. And in this case, you guys know there's no water in it, but I'm going to describe it anyway. We'd shut both of our shut-off valves. Then we would go ahead and open our test cocks up to relieve the pressure within the body. And I'm just removing some quick little plastic caps here. So again, in the field, we'd want to shut down the shut-off valves. We would take a screwdriver and go ahead and open up these test cocks to relieve any pressure within the body. Next, I'm going to take a nut driver and I'm going to remove 4 bolts from the body itself. And what that will do is it'll allow me to take the pressure vessel out of the carrier. In other words, your stainless steel and your bronze ball valves here, those are going to remain connected to the pipe. I'm going to take the pressure vessel, this black section out, and that's the component that we're going to work on. So again, we want to remove these 4 bolts, and that will allow me to take the pressure vessel out of the carrier. Okay, we're just about there. We get these 4 bolts out. Naturally, we'll want to set those aside. We don't want to drop them down in the mud and lose them. We're going to need them to put the valve back together. And with the 4 bolts out, I can now remove the pressure vessel. So again, your carrier, the actual connections to the pipe, this will remain rigid and in line. We're simply removing the pressure vessel. And we're going to get inside here and do 2 things. We're going to change the rubber within the relief valve, and we'll also change the rubber with respect to the checks. I'm going to start with the check valves first. That's typically the direction the instructions point you toward. And I think, again, it could go either direction, but it'll be easier for you to follow along with me. So what we'll do first, on the large end, this is a sleeve. We're going to remove the sleeve. We take the sleeve out and set it aside. And now I can remove the 2 check assemblies from inside the pressure vessel. Now, the best way I found to do this is stand the pressure vessel up, and on the outlet side, just take your thumbs and push down, and both of those checks will then pop loose. Sometimes after the valve's been sitting in the field for a period of time, your lubrication washes away. It may be difficult to get those checks out. So in that case, you can take something like a hammer handle, get on top of it, give yourself a little leverage. The only thing you don't want to do is do not bang on the check components. They're plastic internally and you will fracture them and damage them. So again, a smooth, steady push will make those check valves loosen up and come on out. So now I'm going to lift the pressure vessel up and just set it aside. And here I have my 2 actual checks. I've got my number 1 and my number 2 check. And what we want to do in this case is we're going to change the rubber within these checks. Now, the way they come apart, in fact, too, they're very greasy. You're going to find that when you get in the field. You want to wipe all that up, have something to hang on to. But these checks come apart with a counterclockwise turn of approximately 1/16 of a turn. And that allows the cage part to come off. We can set the spring aside. And now we've got the actual poppet that we're going to change the rubber in. Now, it's a pretty straightforward procedure. You simply want to hold on to the poppet itself, taking a Phillips screwdriver. We're going to remove the bolt that holds the clamping member onto the rubber. We'll set that clamping member aside. And now we want to take this rubber seal out. We're going to take it on out and replace that rubber seal. And usually they're very easy to come out. In this case, my fingers are really greasy, so I'm going to use my little P38 here, pull that rubber out. And there's the old rubber seal. Now, just always with backflow preventers, when you're repairing them, putting rubber in, cleanliness is the key. We want to wipe everything down, make sure we get all grit debris off of it. In fact, it's good practice to have a bucket of water alongside you. That way you can dip it in and get any grit debris off. Frankly, don't put anything on these components that you yourself wouldn't want to eat. So in other words, you're not going to want to get in there with strong ammonia or anything like that. Any cleansers that you use should be something that would be construed for food service, for example. And most of the time, simple water and just a rag is more than enough to take that debris off. So in this case, I've cleaned that poppet up. I'm going to go ahead and go over to my rubber pile here, and I'm going to grab a new rubber seal and place that in the poppet. And then we simply put the clamping member back on. Now this clamping member, it's got a round side and a sharp side. And when I say sharp, it's just the way it was pinched off in the dies when it's made. But for me personally, I like to put that sharp side down and leave the nice smooth side up. We go ahead and reinstall our screw. Get that threaded in there and tighten it back down with our Phillips screwdriver. Now we got it good and tight. We'll get that tight in there, okay. We can reassemble the check. I'm going to set that poppet on top, the spring, and I'm going to put the cage back on there. And again, just give it a little turn. In this case, I'm going clockwise about a 1/16 of a turn. And that's really all there is to changing the rubber within the checks themselves. Your number 2 check, in this case, while I did the number 2, we've got the number 1. It's going to be exactly the same process. They both have that little 1/16 of a turn counterclockwise to take the cage off, remove the poppet, take the rubber out, replace it, and away we go. Now again, both of these are going to be identical in nature, and for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to do that one, but you can see that's how they both work. So we'll set those aside until we get ready to reassemble. Now what I'm going to do is show you how to repair the rubber within the relief valve itself. The relief valve is held onto the pressure vessel with 3 bolts. And that'll allow me not only to take the cover off, but it'll allow me to totally remove the relief valve from the pressure vessel. And I think that's a great idea. It makes it a lot easier so that you can stand it up, get it onto a different bench, get it up higher, whatever you may need to do to make it easier to repair. So once again, with my nut driver, and again, this is the same nut driver, the same size as we used to take the pressure vessel out of the carrier, I'm going to simply loosen these 3 bolts up and remove the relief valve from the body of the pressure vessel. All 3 of those removed, I can set these bolts aside, and now my relief valve will come off the pressure vessel. And it makes it a lot easier for me to repair it this way, standalone. Now, I've got on this pressure vessel a couple of O-rings and a seal ring that we're also going to have to change for the relief valve too. But let's get inside the relief valve first and change that diaphragm assembly. We'll set this pressure vessel aside while we're working on it. Once again, I've got some more bolts, once the same size as the nut driver we used to take the body out and to remove the relief valve from the pressure vessel. I simply want to take those 4 out. And that'll separate the relief valve into 2 halves so I can get in and change the diaphragm. And these aren't really super tight. You've got your diaphragm between the 2 halves. That's what's sealing them up. So it's not like you're going to need an impact wrench or anything to take them apart. It can all be done by hand with a typical nut driver like this or a small ratchet. Once I get those loosened up, I can now separate the 2 halves of the relief valve. One more to loosen up here, there we go. And once I get it apart, I can now take my diaphragm assembly on out of the relief valve. Now what we're going to do with this is we're going to change this rubber diaphragm. But inside here, we've got a spring captured within this diaphragm assembly. Basically what you have on the diaphragm assembly is you have a seat, the diaphragm, and then a plunger itself. So what we're going to do is take this apart, and it's threaded together. I've got a spud wrench that I'm going to use to hold the diaphragm assembly itself. And then on the top, there's a series of, well, I would call them like little triangular areas where you can take a wrench and stand it on end and use that to unthread. So as I'm going along here, you'll kind of see the process. It's really not too difficult. I'm going to take my spud wrench here, and I'm going to hold on to my diaphragm assembly. And then what I've done is I've taken a crescent wrench and I've stood it on end, and I'm just using it like a spanner wrench so that I can unthread the seat from this diaphragm assembly. Now, as I'm doing so, I'm going to set it back down on the table, and I want to caution you This piece, the seat itself, is spring-loaded in here. This is going to pop apart when I finally get that last thread. So you want to be holding on to all of these components because it is spring-loaded. Once I loosen up the seat and the guide, I can go ahead and remove my diaphragm. Now, I found that there's a technique that's easier for me to put this together, certainly for testers, homeowners, etc. You're all going to find your own technique, but this is the way I found it to be the easiest. I'm going to go ahead and take my paper towel here and lay it out on the table so that I don't damage the seat. Because once again, this sharp little edge here, this is my seat profile. That's what's biting into the seal ring when this relief valve is in a closed position. If I damage this, the relief valve is going to leak. So I want to be very, very careful and to not damage that particular component. So I'm going to set it down on something that's nice and smooth like that. Generally too, if you can even get it on a piece of rubber like your old diaphragm, there's certainly nothing wrong with doing that. That'll protect that seat. Next, we're going to take that diaphragm, we'll set it on top of that seat, and now I need to go ahead and reinstall my guide and then put the spring assembly back together. Now, while you're doing this, this spring is a pretty tall spring. It's kind of slinky. It's got a slinky index to it. And as you're pushing down on this, it may want to slink to one side a little bit. You've just got to kind of put a steady, even load on it to get that back together. We'll set that guide back in again, put my diaphragm back on top, and then I take the plunger and I'm pushing it down with a steady, even load. And as I said, that spring's a little bit slinky, so we have to be careful with that. But once we push it down, give it a few turns until we catch a few threads there, hopefully. Okay, now I can go ahead and tighten him all the rest of the way up. And again, just take this, set that on your spud wrench. You've got a hexagon on there. We'll go ahead and set that into our spud wrench. And then once again, I'm going to take my crescent wrench and use it as a spanner to tighten that seat back up. Now this does not have to be super tight. You've got what we call stingers inside there that are biting into the rubber, and that's what's going to seal it up. So we just want to give this a good hand tight turn there. Let me get it lined up again once more. And certainly you folks out in the field, you're going to have a vise on your truck or a vise at your bench within your garage, and it's going to make this a lot easier than what I'm doing here by hand. But you can see it is pretty straightforward. So again, catching those, just give it a little tightening up, and I'm done. That's all I need to do to tighten up that diaphragm assembly. Now, before we reinstall this diaphragm assembly back into our relief valve body, it is good practice, let me set my old rubber aside here, always clean things up within your relief valve, any part of a backflow preventer. It's imperative to get all the debris out of there. We want to wipe it out, get out any grit, anything of that nature. And again, if you need to do this with some kind of cleaner, it's always good to use a bucket of water. Just take a bucket of water, rinse it off, wipe off the grit, and you should be good. Now on this half of the diaphragm assembly, I've got 3 O-rings that I'm going to need to change out. I'm going to have to remove the plunger O-ring, the wide cover O-ring, and lastly there's a small O-ring right here that seals up the diaphragm against that body. And once again, I think what I'll do is get my keys out and ever so gently lift that O-ring out. Don't scratch any of your plastic or anything of that nature. Now we can set it aside. So we'll take our new O-ring for the cover. We're going to take the small one that seals against the diaphragm. And mind you, I've lubricated these O-rings. They've got a little lubrication on them. I pre-lube them. Always lubricate O-rings when you put them into any body. It doesn't matter if it's a backflow preventer or a regulator or anything of that nature. You're going to want to lubricate O-rings because that makes them want to seal effectively. So I've got the small diaphragm O-ring, the larger cover O-ring, and lastly, I'm going to insert my lubricated plunger O-ring. Now there's 2 ways we could do this. We can either put it on to the plunger itself, which in this case I think that's what I'm going to do, and then we just go ahead and slide these components back together. Now I want to go ahead and take my cover and put it back onto the diaphragm or to the relief valve assembly here. And a little tough getting the screws together. They got to go through the rubber. No big deal. Okay. And once again, we'll tighten those back up with our nut driver. Now gently cross tighten them. We don't have to get overzealous with our tightening here. We've got that diaphragm to seal things up. Okay, just double checking here. We'll cross tighten and make sure that we get that good and tight. I feel good. It feels fine. One more small O-ring we want to install onto the relief valve itself. That's what seals the relief valve sensing port to the body. And before we put the body onto the rest of the pressure vessel, I want to go ahead and take this O-ring off, and I'm going to change the rubber seal ring. This is the rubber seal ring that actually seals off the relief valve. Now, in most cases, the relief valve or the seat is usually stationary, and the rubber pulls away from that seat to open the relief valve up. In this design, it's just exactly the opposite. Your rubber seal ring is stationary, and the seat pulls away from that to open up the relief valve for discharge. So in this case, to remove the seat, all I have to do is take a Phillips screwdriver and simply take the screw out, set that aside. I think we'll use my key again to pry that out. And always gently, just gently pry things out. Okay, there's my rubber seal. We'll set that aside, put our new one back in, and replace our clamping member and our screw to hold that into place with our Phillips screwdriver. Okay, got it tightened. Replace the seal ring. Now, lastly, I'm going to replace the O-ring. And I want to check it, make sure I get the right one in there. I do indeed have it. And again, I've pre-lubricated these O-rings. You want them to be lubed. O-rings crave lubrication to seal correctly, so that's why we want to get them lubed up. We'll go ahead and put that O-ring back on, and now I can reattach my relief valve to the pressure vessel. Like I said, when it's in line, sure makes it a lot easier if you have a vise than if you're doing it right here at the bench. But we go ahead and reinstall our 3 bolts to hold that down. So we've got a few O-rings left. What we're going to do is change those before we put the check valves back in. On each one of our check modules, we have an external diametrical O-ring that we need to change. To get those off, it's generally a matter of getting a hold of them and wiping the grease off a little bit and getting it to stick out a little bit. Then you get your finger back behind it. Go ahead and roll that O-ring out. And once again, we'll replace those O-rings. Okay. There we go. Okay, we've got our O-ring on there. I would do that to both of these checks. Now, to reinstall it in the vessel, this is the part that Paul Wade, our National Sales Manager in Irrigation, kind of gave me a good tip on this. We've also got our O-ring on the sleeve too. We're going to change those accordingly. Also on the outside of the sleeve, we can do that, the outside when we get done. But again, we want to change the inner O-ring. That's why I have so many O-rings. And again, for the sake of brevity, I'm just pointing it out to you, but I'll show you how to put this back together. Take your sleeve and set it on the edge of the table, and then stack your check modules right on top of that sleeve. Get them perfectly lined up. Then all I have to do is grab the whole pressure vessel, set it down over this, and give it a push. And I've just put it all back together. Now I can go ahead and reinstall it back into the carrier itself. So just to reiterate what we did, we pulled our check modules out, we changed the rubber seal rings within those check modules, we took off our relief valve, we replaced the diaphragm, all of the O-rings internally, and the seal ring. We've replaced our O-rings on the check modules themselves that seal it against the body. We replace the O-ring on the sleeve, and lastly, we will replace the 2 O-rings on the inlet and outlet of the sleeve, again lubricating. And once we get that done, we can go ahead and reinstall them within the valve. And again, just to make this easier for myself, I'm going to lay it on its side, but you get the gist of it. In fact, I might want to hold it up so I can make sure I line up my screws correctly. There we go. Once I get one in, then I go ahead and get the rest of them in without any problem. Okay, and once I get them tight, then all I have to do is go ahead and slowly open my inlet up, re-energize the valve. With the test cocks open, you're going to have air and water coming out, and then shut those test cocks off. Once the body's pressurized, we slowly crack the outlet until we fill the entire system. And you'll be able to hear the water flowing through the valve when you're filling that system. We don't want to open him up quick. We could send a water hammer down there and really cause a problem. So very slowly. But again, once the system is filled, we can open the valve up fully, and we have completed the process. Now, I know it looked a little cumbersome doing it here on this table like this. As I said, when you're out in the truck, a performance tester, for example, you're going to have your vise, etc. But I think I made it clear in how simple it is to repair this valve. Very straightforward. We're simply changing the rubber in the checks, the O-rings, the diaphragm in the relief valve, its seal ring and O-rings, and quite frankly, that's all there is inside this valve with respect to rubber. Should you have any questions on this, I'll ask you to give our customer care department here at Zurn Industries a call. We're always happy to help you. We can walk you through this process in the field. Again, it's really straightforward. If you find that you need more direct attention than what you can get over the phone, we'll certainly connect you with one of our representatives. They're very knowledgeable about these products, and they'll be able to help you also. So don't hesitate to call us if you need help ever servicing any Wilkins product, or the 375XL 1¼ through 2" in size in particular.